economy, get out Ahmadinejad, get out all the whole supreme council of killers and thugs, and then hopefully replace, if there's a better movement, replace it with them in one that completely renounces terrorism and the whole Islamist movement against the US. That would be the only economic way, but it may well be that there's only a military solution. That would be that'd be a direct and focused war on defeating a government, not a welfare war like Afghanistan and Iraq. But the idea of punishing ourselves by renouncing oil and hoping that will somehow, someday, some way make Iran and Saudi Arabia a little less rich is a really, I think, to say the least, misguided way of defending ourselves. It's in fact a confession of weakness, which is in no small part why Iran has no fear of us and we get nothing in negotiation, because they know that we won't do anything substantial. Yes?
What of world oil production? Do you know what percent goes to fuel versus product?
Product is about 15%, but fuel, fuel can be misleading because we have things like diesel fuel, jet fuel, gasoline. So in the US, it's about 50% gasoline, and you can look it up pretty easily what the rest of the mix is. So yeah, gasoline is a big percentage of it, but there's also jet fuel, and diesel I think is the second biggest. So that's for your, a lot of your freighters and all of this industrial machinery that we're talking about. But keep in mind, not keep in mind, but just as an important fact about oil, oil is, by default, oil contains different what are called fractions of different kinds of, sets of hydrocarbons. So by default, it contains X% of kerosene, X% of gasoline, X% of diesel, X% of really light, what's called naphtha, and X% of tar. But thanks, and over time, oil engineers have gotten better and better at choosing at reorienting the barrel of oil so that you can get more of what you want and less of what you don't. So in the old days, at first they could get only 50% kerosene, and they could get 55 or 60. And originally they could only get 25% gasoline, now they can get 50. So in the future, as different, let's say there was more development in the world. Let's say that took over more, you could convert more of your fuel supply to diesel. So that's one of the or that you wanted more petroleum products. You could use it all for petroleum products, because you could basically run oil, and it's amazing what they can do. They can just effectively run it through a machine, break it down completely, and use almost every last drop of it to build anything you want to build. So it's incredibly flexible. Yes, in the glasses.
My question is about, you addressed earlier how the market would eventually naturally wean us off oil should it run out. Do prices rising, that sort of thing?
No, so it won't run out. No, I'm saying it won't run out because individuals will plan and choose based on prices.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be true in an ideal world, but my question is, how does OPEC factor into that? Because a large amount of the world's oil is controlled by a cartel, and they're shielding us from some of those pricing motivators. And once that is gone, the price shocks will be, I don't know, how are you going to deal with that? Like, why not artificially, since they're artificially shielding us from some of those pricing factors, why not artificially recognize that somehow?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, so OPEC is a good issue to understand in the oil market. But it's important to understand what OPEC is doing. OPEC is fundamentally, there are two things I want to point out about OPEC. So OPEC is oil-producing, exporting countries. It's a cartel. So what's a cartel? It's a group that collectively decides to artificially limit production to raise prices. That's the goal of a cartel. And OPEC can sometimes do that, sometimes not. It's easiest to do if you do a massive supply cutoff. But it's important to understand that OPEC isn't just a bunch of nations like the United States. It's a bunch of dictatorships that have nationalized the oil illegitimately, and that is oil, I believe, morally and economically belongs in private hands. Now, that doesn't mean I can create that overnight, but I think it's important for people to understand that, King Saud, it is absurd that he has that oil. That oil was stolen from was developed by Western oil companies. It was stolen from them. It's certainly doesn't belong to that king. He has no claim whatsoever. He's just a randomly installed thug. And we should start viewing that kind of ownership of oil as illegitimate, and that would really undermine OPEC. That said, I don't have direct control over what happens to the future of OPEC. So let's talk about how OPEC's ability for these dictators to get together and manipulate prices, how that will affect. It doesn't change anything fundamentally about how the price system works and about our ability to adjust. What it does is it artificially lowers the amount of oil on the market, so it lowers our amount of wealth. But in terms of signals, there's no change in the signal. What happens is it's as if that oil didn't exist. So just imagine that there was 20% less oil in the world. So that would affect production, and then you would have to find substitutes more quickly, and you would proceed just as fine. But there's no, the whole price system in free individuals work based on reality as it exists today. So just in the same way, in this country, we forbid drilling in Anwar on the Outer Continental Shelf, and so if that had been allowed years ago, we'd certainly have more oil today. Oil prices would be lower. It's arguably how much lower. But the price system still works today, given that. We act as if we have less oil, because we do have less oil. I mean, we have more potential oil, but the price system works on the actual facts and projections of the actual facts of the future. But I don't want to act as if the market is some magic thing that we have faith in. The market is just all of us judging for the future what is going to be to our interest, what is going to be available based on prices which reflect supply and demand. I mean, you can learn more about it in economics textbooks, but it's not something that it's too often viewed as some mystical entity. It's just us.
Can I just ask one more question? It's just a price question.
Sure.
I'm thinking about your point. It's a good point. If you look at the price data and the production data over the past, say, 5 years, I mean, we've had a pretty large run-up in prices. If you remove this blip that occurred about a year ago, we're back up to, what, $80 a barrel, $75 a barrel
Yes.
right now. We're up to 140 for a while. You know, whereas 10 years ago, we were down to about 20 bucks.
Right.
Amazingly. So one thing I'd be interested in your opinion on this. One thing that's interesting is that although we've had a pretty steep run-up in prices in 5, 6 years, we haven't seen a very large increase in production. I mean, this is total production, OPEC and non-OPEC, which is, you know, we've been hovering around like 80, 82, 83, up to maybe 85. And I think last year we peaked out like 86,000 barrels per day. But given that prices are so high, I mean, you'd think that we would be able to, that we'd have people just clamoring and companies clamoring to, you know, whether they're nationalized or not, to get this stuff out of the ground as quickly as possible. There's a lot of money there. And
There's a lot of money at different price points, right? So the major problem, there are two things. One is just in general, as far as price rises. When people make any given barrel of oil takes X dollars to extract, and then so companies have to decide how much is it going to cost to extract, how much can I expect to get for it at the market. Now in Saudi Arabia, there's no question. You're talking $3 a barrel or so. So that's easiest oil in the world to pump. If you're talking about tar sands in Canada, which is not even part of the 10 trillion I talked about, or let alone shale, which has been really controversial, and there's a lot of hype over, which I think, if you look at the history, there's been hype over shale for 100 years, so you have to take that in with many grains of salt or shale. Yes. But, see, now I make a joke. So with the, what was the question again?
It was that we
Oh,
had
the
a large
price. Yeah, so
increase in
the prices.
price.
So that part of it is you need to see you have to have a sustained forecast of a price increase to be sure. So, and not just a price, and that also has to factor in inflation. And I think a lot of what we've seen in our prices are reflections of inflation, and I think that's going to get a lot worse, unfortunately. But the other variable and this pertains to the question about OPEC, is that there are many, many factors in the world that are constraining supply. So let's take some place like Venezuela. Well, Venezuela is becoming less efficient at producing oil. And it's not because there's less oil, it's because there's more Chavez. So there's more socialism. And that's the general pattern. Mexico is horrific also in terms of its role in